5G, reinventing the customer experience while redesigning the relationship between telcos and vertical industries for their connectivity needs. With 5G, vertical industries, like media, can request on-demand network usage through a platform that details their needs and completely changes their operations. Development for such platform only takes 6 weeks, and as we collaborate to build your platform, you'll have full access to our 5G lab. Let's leverage the power of 5G to imagine, create, and monetize service and business models of the future. Schedule your live demo today at capgemini.com.
We started with computers. We didn't stop at computers. We didn't stop at storage or cloud. We kept going, working with our customers to enable a kind of technology that can guide an astronaut back to safety and help make a hospital come to you instead of you going to it. So when it comes to your business, you know we'll stop at nothing.
Talent landscape is rapidly evolving, with new skills and roles emerging faster than ever before. HR leaders need curated intelligence to build new age roles to support their transforming business. Unfortunately, existing talent intelligence solutions rely on self-reported public data constraint HR leaders with subjective workforce planning, limited global coverage, absence of emerging skills, and lack of predictive insights. Through a taxonomy-led approach, DROP tracks and validates a comprehensive set of talent ecosystem pillars, such as industries, companies, locations, universities, and professionals. We look at multiple data assets, meaning you can get a realistic view of suitable talent for your business. DROP is an AI-driven reskilling and talent intelligence platform providing a comprehensive and integrated view of the global talent, enabling informed workforce strategy and executable workforce plans.
good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from across the globe, and welcome to the 14th edition of Zinnov Confluence. I'm Priyanka Oza, and I'll be your host this evening to take you through another specially curated, stellar lineup of action-packed sessions. The last 18 months of the pandemic have incited three key behavioral responses from the ecosystem. The first was our immediate reaction to the coronavirus. The second was the focus on recovery from the debilitating first and second waves. And the third and current priority is building for resiliency at the core of organizational culture. It is in this light that this year's theme is Reboot and Reimagine, Winning the Growth Wars, with this upcoming track specifically focusing on winning today's cutthroat war for top talent. This morning's session highlighted the importance of bulletproof leadership in driving organizational success in the new normal. As crucial as that is, the pandemic has made it incredibly clear that a company is only as good as all of its people. We've witnessed employee well-being and robust talent strategies becoming the top priority for companies in this post-pandemic reality. As we reimagine the future of work and overcoming impending disruptions, the people navigating through them to emerge victorious on the other side, the employees, are who we will be focusing on today. We will be commencing today's session with a keynote speech on global tech talent demand characteristics and the associated reskilling imperatives by Vijay Swaminathan, CEO and co-founder of Drop. We are also privileged to be once again joined by V. Lakshminath, Managing Director of Broadridge Financial Solutions, who will be taking us through a keynote on Attention 3.0, how to build world-class organizations and products in the age of shrinking attention spans, a topic that's sure to have hit home for all of us at some point in the last year and a half. Along those lines, we also have a coffee chat on Rebooting Culture 2.0, enhancing organizational culture for the remote workplace, where Siddhant Rastogi, Managing Partner and Global Head for Zinnov, will be engaging in a conversation with Lisa Leskow, Chief People Officer at Bristlecone, and intercultural coach and author, Aarti Kelchikar. This will be followed by a panel discussion on the talent equation, attracting and retaining high-quality talent in the new normal. As you can see on the screen, we will have senior executives from Swiss Re, Honeywell, Walmart Global Technologies, and Dell Technologies exploring strategies to remain a leading employer, whether in hiring or retaining high-quality talent. Our last session today explores a passion of mine, the science behind human behavior. We will have a Z-Talk on tapping into your primitive brain. Our session chair, Falguni Desai, Digital Strategy Officer at Microsoft, will be talking with Marco Greenberg, President and COO of Thunder 11, on the process of shifting civilized company culture to one with relentless drive. And to summarize day one on this year's Zinnov Confluence India edition and deliver the closing note of the talent track, we will be joined by Priyanka Kumar, Engagement Manager at Zinnov. Before we jump into the next 3 hours of sessions, we'd like to thank all our partners, Platinum, Gold, and Silver, without whose continued support, a conference of this scale would not be possible. Also, a big shout out to our customers and everyone who has taken the time out to join us today. The success of Zinnov Confluence always rests on your encouragement and unwavering enthusiasm. The flurry of questions and diverse insights are what we eagerly look forward to. So please feel free to post your thoughts and engage with each other in the comment section below. We also encourage you to share your learnings on Twitter and LinkedIn. And while you do, remember to use the hashtag Zinnov Confluence and Define Tomorrow to increase your chances to win some goodies. We will also be running interesting polls throughout, and we look forward to your participation. At any point in time, should you encounter issues or have any queries, please write to us at events@zinnov.com and we shall get back to you immediately. Thank you. With that and no further ado, let's kick off this evening's sessions. I, for one, cannot wait to get started. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you our first session for this evening. The global pandemic has fueled an unprecedented surge in demand for high-skilled talent and the need for organizations to upskill their existing talent. Vijay Swaminathan, CEO and co-founder of Drop, will be sharing his expertise on the new skills that will be needed to compete in the new normal, how to identify gaps in employee skill sets, as well as the different ways to enable organizational upskilling and reskilling in the remote setup. Over to you, Vijay.
Thank you, Priyanka. It's an absolute privilege to be here. Continuing the opening keynote that Pari Natarajan gave, I was deeply inspired by that, where Pari outlined the mega trends that is going to shape up the next decade or so. And the underlying connect there is the future of work and the associated labor characteristics or the labor strategy that companies should design. And it is very, very critical to design a very effective talent strategy and sustain that to win this growth war. And today we'll be sharing some of our insights from Drop that we have gathered through our AI platform and also our engagement with well over 100 plus customers. We're delighted to share how companies can use some of the data sets and strategies to reboot and reimagine their enterprise. Let me actually begin with some historical perspectives. Now, today, if you in digital software-driven world, the economies are largely skill biased. What do I mean by that? That means if your organizations or your country has a lot of skills, that is bound to translate into higher GDP growth and higher output. But if you look at the history and go back to the first industrial revolution, like somewhere around 1800s, that wasn't the case. In fact, the opposite effect was in place. And many labor market economists would consider the study done by Andrew Urey as a very, very important study. And Dr. Urey actually called this removing the task from cunning workman. What that means is Urey spent countless hours in manufacturing cotton plants and really looking at what is the most skilled worker doing there and how am I going to kind of de-skill that so that unskilled labor can really produce. So incidentally, there was actually a growth of unskilled labor around that time frame. Then the economy sort of shifted towards more automation and skilled workers. And some would regard that this is actually an origin of automation that kind of started here. The reason that I say that is today's modern society's digital initiatives are not just driven by automation. The modern digital initiatives really have to enable like collaboration. And there was actually a great panel discussion in the first session where the products have to communicate a form of empathy. It has to enable remote work now post the pandemic, and it has to give, more importantly, an experience to the customers. And it is this multiple priorities that companies are really adopting and favoring multiple digital initiatives. And one of the interesting things that has happened in the last 1 decade or so is the trust that we place on technology is progressively increasing. Today, if you walk into a retail store and if you see a bot that would give you product descriptions and where products are stored, you actually intuitively trust that. And that has actually changed in the last 2 decades or so dramatically. And it is the confluence of these various initiatives that companies are putting out or undertaking, especially post the pandemic, and has resulted in recruitment wanting to hire tech talent at both from an IT standpoint and from a product engineering standpoint. And they are facing really, really tough conditions. If you look at the global supply demand gap for tech talent, it is around 4.47 million professionals. And that is expected to grow almost to 8 million in the next 4 to 5 years. And today, an average time to fill job for a global average across even a simple tech job is 50 plus days. Makes you wonder if there is anything called a simple tech job anymore. There is a huge competition from enterprises, and at the same time, venture capitals have unleashed funds, and there is a huge talent war across both enterprises and startups. And against this backdrop, we are also seeing some sort of effects that are making this a lot more challenging. Now, the new concept is to make sure that organizations can compete in a remote workforce environment. That means if companies are choosing to wanting to go back the old way of doing things, they may be exposing themselves to talent loss. And similarly, there are also some dynamics about how do we challenges around enabling women and other multiple diverse workforce, bringing them into tech. And that has become a boardroom conversation across every single client situation that we are involved in. And against this backdrop, one other thing that is also happening is keeping leaders awake. And that is the demand for frontline workers is also increasing. That means today, a bank is really not able to hire a teller that easily as they were, just like last year. Supply chain companies are unable to find truck drivers. In some ways, some of the insurance company jobs, such as underwriting and other jobs that we thought would be automated by now, there is still heavy human involvement in those jobs. So what has happened is the effect of AI and automation that we sort of expected in the early 2000 or even mid 2000 hasn't really materialized the same way that we wanted it to be. I very well remember that the call center strategies in early 2005 would be around, there will be no calls by 2020, but that has not happened yet. That doesn't mean the progress is not there for a variety of reasons and how you make AI work into AGI. All those considerations have a little bit slowed the effect of automation, and that is being felt by recruitment infrastructure in conjunction with actually hiring for tech talent. Now, in order to enable their technology initiatives, companies are looking at every single corner in the world. And today, there are hotspots in Eastern Europe, hotspots in Southeast Asia, newer hotspots coming up in Latin America, Central America. And some of the progress that Argentina and Brazil that have made in the field of education is just outstanding. 1/4 of the GDP spend of Argentina goes into education. Similarly, Mexico has transformed their tech ecosystem in a very, very big way. Guadalajara is a very, very emerging, solid tech hub. And in this, while the advantage is there among the large hubs of USA, China, and India, it is highly encouraging that it is beginning to spread out. For example, Rwanda has a very active tech ecosystem where there is about 250 consumer software tech companies. And this is actually a very encouraging sign. And we hope that the companies would continue to tap into these global hotspots. Now, when you look at large markets like US, something very interesting is happening. For the first time post the pandemic, we are seeing some movement into middle cities. So more people are moving into Denver, more people are moving into Midwest cities. From San Francisco, more people are moving from places like New York into Middle America. Dallas is a big beneficiary in this process. And also some of the areas of Raleigh. Apple has actually very recently prioritized Raleigh as their key hub. And many experiments are also happening in a positive way. Apple, for example, sent a team of 5 engineers to a place called Columbus, Georgia. And they in turn worked for the last 2 years and built a team of about 15 engineers working with the local universities, local companies, understanding where the talent is, and built a small team. And that's a very, very powerful case study. And Facebook is also trying to prioritize places like Alabama, where they are now seeing that there is a potential diversity of STEM talent that is coming up across multiple ethnicities. And these are very interesting dynamics that need to be considered when you are designing and reimagining your talent strategies. And as you look at from a global standpoint as well, countries are gearing up in a very big way to attract global tech talent. And the success story has been from Canada, where in the last 3 to 4 years, they have worked very hard to attract foreign student enrollments into their universities. And that is evident by a growth of about 13% in 2020 compared to the previous year. And also their progressive immigration policies is well received by the tech community, and they have done incredibly well benchmarking their policies against other policies. Perhaps one dynamic that also need to be understood is really the last few years, because of the complex rhetorics that took place in the United States and the associated stress points around immigration and other related policies, we actually saw an increase in H-1B denials in the US. And unfortunately, as it started reversing, the world went into the COVID freeze. So the long-term effect of this is still being debated and adjusted and modeled. But I think this is one critical area where the US potentially lost some degree of talent because of the complex rhetorics around immigration. Now, whether you could actually see, to summarize, you have complex digital initiatives that are employee-facing, customer-facing, and you have to do it in rapid timeframes. You have limited in-house talent, so you have to build that talent and then execute on these priorities. All that means that the supply-demand gap for tech talent, which is, as I mentioned in the beginning, from 4.46 million is expected to grow to 8.04 million by 2026. And that's we took into consideration multiple components such as the graduating talent supply pool and how much adjacent talent pool could potentially come in, and the convergence of IT and software that was briefly discussed here in the morning session. All that would still mean that we have a substantial gap. Now, when faced with this gap, this type of a gap, recruiters are going to feel it, leaders are going to feel it, boardrooms are going to be discussing about it on an ongoing basis. And that means that we truly have come to a reimagination point. And one of the components that Pari highlighted yesterday in his keynote is you simply can't continue to handle the next phase of this evolution with your older practices. So we have to reimagine the enterprise and reboot the enterprise. So what are the elements of reboot that we can think about when it comes to procuring skills? Because we do have to dynamically shift the way we procure skills. We can't go about, here are the requirements, let's type that up, let's put a JD, and then let's go procure the skill. And one important component that we actually put to use is ability to take advantage of the feeder roles. Here I'm showcasing an example of an engineering company where there is a lot more automation across traditional areas of engineering. How would we bring them into AI and autonomous systems, whether that is machine learning engineer or data science type of layers or embedded systems layers, and so on. And for that, there are multiple steps involved in that, looking at historical career progressions in terms of today's machine learning engineer, what is their origin points? Like, what did they do before? What did they do prior to that? And you can kind of re-engineer that path and design a reskilling propensity index. And that involves multiple components like commitment from leadership. But one of the important things that we found it useful is mapping role transitions and the relationships. That means bringing in a very clear integration of career transition with reskilling. So not to do reskilling initiatives in an isolated manner, but tie it with the career conversations that you are having and the performance conversations that you are having. So there are, in transitioning, say something like a systems data analyst to a machine learning engineer, there are multiple N nodes, intermediate nodes. And those intermediate nodes are also very useful for the current digital transformation. So mapping how long it would take and setting the right expectations with your employees is a very, very important component of your reimagined enterprise activity. And this is one area where it can help you in two ways. One is you can take advantage of people who are in the adjacent zones within your enterprise. And the other is actually, if this can be developed into a mechanism for recruitment, we can also tap into other other adjacent skills within the market and then accelerate towards that hiring. Now, the second component that we bring it to your attention is how do we actually reimagine our associations, enterprises associations with universities? And that means that we would have to work with not just with very reputed universities, but also smaller universities, community colleges, and other institutes that can slowly improve the readiness of the universities. And actually, companies like Microsoft have done this in places like Suzhou, for example, where they work with local universities to improve the English language proficiency of the engineering graduates. And if you look at India, we have about 1 million plus graduates who are coming out qualified, but the people who are ready to join an enterprise is only about 1/4 of that, or about 23 to 24%. And there is a huge opportunity. It is actually an opportunity because there is something that India can actually work on and increase that. And even if we move the needle a little bit, that results in a huge supply of talent pool that can be put into use. And the other aspect to that, an enabling factor to that is not be so attached to the bigger established cities. If you look at the distribution of engineering graduates across tier 1 cities and smaller cities, 55% of the engineering graduation is happening in smaller cities and smaller towns. And not everybody will have the luxury or the means to come to a bigger city like a Bangalore or a Hyderabad or a Delhi and start their job search process. And many of them simply get left out, or they just take the job that comes their way and lose the engineering curriculum that they went through. And if we can start thinking about rural hubs, now one of the advantages that we have is the acceleration of cloud initiatives. We can pretty much work from anywhere. How do we use this vantage point and accelerate rural hubs and take the work to some of these larger rural hubs and enable talent pool in a significant way? And that can open up the readiness of India's huge graduating talent pool. One more component that I'm personally a big fan of is there is also the demand. There is a desirable demand growth, and then there is an undesirable demand growth, especially when it comes to the technology infrastructure, there is a lot of internal requests that come into play, meaning how do you get data to finance? How do you support HR with various data sets? How do you put out applications for data inquiry? And if citizens development can be more broadly adopted, that can actually check some of the undesirable demand growth, where some of the existing teams can be equipped to handle bulk of their need in a self-serviced way. Actually, Google is doing a lot of experiments like this, where they want their finance team not to be dependent on their IT team to run reports or collect data. So they are training them in multiple languages and tools so that they could do some of their activities themselves. And this is a very, very important layer when it comes to reimagining the tech talent strategy. And one of the important component at the end of the day, for us to have a winning labor strategy, it has to be an inclusive strategy. Today, we have a lot of vulnerabilities in this. We are seeing an unwanted trend of lower women participation in the tech talent, in the tech labor market. We are also not seeing enough diversity in markets like the US when it comes to ethnicity diversity. And the ability to tap into neurodiversity is becoming high, but we haven't really made substantial progress in tapping into neurodiverse candidates. And also, there is multiple initiatives to bring in, how do you integrate the Gen Z workforce more seamlessly into the tech development ecosystem. And also, the way of work like contingent labor, which is a very important labor strategy, but it is happening more at micro steps level, not necessarily integrated well into the agile development cycles. And these are sort of the opportunities around equality and how equitable we can be across all workforce segments is going to dictate whether we have a winning labor strategy or not. And the important thing, we may have many conditions to handle. Perhaps there is one cure for all this, and that is really learning. If we have a very strong learning strategy, and if we can make that learning strategy available across all sections of the enterprise, and even make it available to external ecosystem, then we can build a very powerful labor strategy and talent strategy, and we can compete in a very powerful way and execute on all the mega trends that Pari spoke about in his keynote. Thank you so much. A privilege for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Some really powerful points there. We do have an audience question for you. Mukesh Lalchandani would like to know, looking at current talent war, where we see that the cost of having the right talent is very high, how does India position as compared to global suppliers from an economic standpoint?
Absolutely. I think the cost in India is going up, but so are the costs across all the locations. And I think, as I said, India is the third, when it comes to core software talent, the third largest supply. So it is an undeniable force. It's already a force in global initiatives. Even in highly regulated industries, India is playing a dominant role. I think for India to innovate on the cost advantage, we really have to tap into talent that is hidden in the rural engineering colleges, rural centers, and that can give even more cost advantage for the next 10 to 15 years. And also, how do we truly upskill adjacent talent that is digitally savvy? Perhaps they do not know certain products and solutions and languages, but India can actually upskill into that and provide yet another opportunity from a labor supply standpoint. And that reskillable talent itself is around 2.5 million people in India. So these are massive numbers. So our belief is India will maintain the cost advantage in comparison with other global locations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those insights, Vijay, and for your time today.
Thank you.
For those of you that sent some questions, in the interest of time, we will be taking them offline and we'll try our best to get back to you. We couldn't agree more that the culture of learning as well as inclusivity is an absolute imperative for organizations, and that technology is the execution medium of the future. Our next session will tell us exactly how we can leverage those tools efficiently. But before that, a quick word from our partners. Our dependence on technology and tools, be it for L&D, collaboration, communication, and everything in between, is irrefutable in today's remote world. However, the engaging nature of the devices, technology, and applications that we use are subsequently making us more distracted than ever before. So how can leaders enable the workforce to have an effective attention span? How can systems be redesigned to inculcate concentration despite numerous distractions for periods of optimum focus? It's my pleasure to invite V. Lakshmikant, or VLK as most of us know him, Managing Director of Broadridge Financial Solutions, to share his thoughts on this. Over to you, VLK.
Hey, thanks, Priyanka. I truly appreciate the privilege of being here. And this is probably my nth Confluence session. Enjoy the session, enjoy the participation. It's been a great event. Congrats to Pari and the team. So first of all, obviously, Vijay started off on a great topic about talent and how we can bring talent in. I think I go to follow up. We may be able to hire the talent. The question is how are we going to get them to pay attention, right? So that's very important. You can bring the people in, but if they don't pay attention, you're not going to get the productivity. So I guess this question about attention, devices, digital distractions has been going on for a long time, and I think a lot of us are aware of it. And there have been some steps that have been taken to kind of handle that. So I just want to take a slightly different and a provocative look at this. So kindly indulge me. Some of what I might say may be politically incorrect, but these are some thoughts, and I think this is time for us to really look at this very seriously and kind of look at this and kind of come with some creative solutions for it. So a little bit of background. So my eldest daughter is a big fan of Zen, okay, and we were talking the other day, and this kind of struck me. That is, there was this Zen student who really wanted to go and learn something, and he said, I want to learn. The master said 10 years. Then he said, I'll work harder. I'll work, I'll do all kinds of sacrifices. And the master said it's going to take you 70 years. So this is actually a very, telling kind of a story from Zen, which means that sometimes the faster you go, the slower you get. Okay, so, and I thought this is an extremely pertinent point in our discussion today. In many ways, that's the reason why I even suggested this topic. So it's all about trying to be deliberate. And, And deliberate could be mindfulness, etc., etc., etc. So I think this is a very important point that, fast is not the answer, slow is the answer. Okay. So the tortoise is probably going to win the race and not the hare, okay, out here. So if you really think of this, and look at what organizations are doing, I think all of us have done this. Okay. We say, let's teach people mindfulness. Let's teach people meditation. Okay. Let's teach people, listening skills. So a lot of us go through these skill development kind of programs. So we're looking at this as a skill gap. Okay. And that's something I think we need to reflect on. Is it a skill gap or is it something else? Okay. So what really happens is you go for this mindfulness session, and 2 weeks later we are unmindful again. So, and second thing, a lot of organizations also start to get very Orwellian in this, which means that they don't trust people. They start to micromanage your time. You have to be every moment in front of your computer. I'm going to capture your keystrokes, etc., etc. So, for example, there is today technology that can be very, very intrusive. For example, today, let's say you're driving a car or a truck. Technology can kind of tell you whether you're paying attention and if you're going to fall asleep. And in case you're going to do that, it'll kind of wake you up. So imagine that being used in the workplace. Imagine that you're sitting there, and in front of the computer, the screen, and the computer is able to tell you, buddy, you're falling asleep, you're not paying attention, pay attention. So I don't think any of us want to get to that Orwellian state. I think, but there are organizations which can get to that extreme. So the way I kind of think about it is, these are, skill gaps that we're looking at, but I don't think they're skill gaps. This is something more fundamental. While these are some solutions, but this is not the solution. And we really need to look at the root problem, a root cause. Okay. Now, question is, what's the root cause? Okay. And I think there is a clash between what the organizations want and what the individual wants. And I think that's something we need to really understand well in order to be able to solve for this particular problem. So what do I mean by that? Okay. Somebody said more is a 4-letter word. Okay. And I tend to agree, because today all of us want more, whether it's the organization or the individual. Okay. Now, what does the organization want? See, most of the organizations are still stuck in what I call the industrial mindset. Okay. What's the industrial mindset? Industrial mindset is about being able to produce things faster, better, and cheaper. Okay. And I call it a production kind of a mindset. Okay. And idea is, you take something, you keep polishing it, okay, until it gets better and better. And you make a systemic process out of it. And once you make a systemic process out of it, you can actually ship it to the lowest cost location that can execute on it. So that's by and large the industrial, mindset. And quite often that's also applied to software engineering. Okay? And at the same time, so that's one, one part of the equation where the organizations want more, which is better, faster, cheaper, using an industrial mindset with a production kind of outlook. At the same time, an individual has his own, more. So the individual wants more distraction, more novelty, more experiences, and but his needs are a lot more emotional. So here we have an industrial equation trying to kind of meet up with an emotional kind of an equation, and I think that's where the clash of the civilization, so to speak, is. So unless we're able to bridge this gap, okay, I don't think we'll be able to solve the problem fundamentally. So which means that in order for us to look at this problem and kind of come up with some creative solutions, we need to take a look at both the enterprise and the individual. I don't think solving it from the just training people on mindfulness, etc., is going to work. Okay. And secondly, I just want to kind of stress on this point, that is, today we use the term agility. Okay, and I think it's one of the most misused terms in the world. Okay, today everything is agile, everything is agility, and I kind of think of agility is the new term for more. I want more. Okay, so instead of saying more, we are just saying agile. Okay, and I think we need to get out of that. I think we need to really find what agility means, and I'll kind of talk about what agility means from my perspective down the line. But I think that's something for us to reflect on. We should stop wanting more. We should slow down, okay, and do more perfect work. That's the way I kind of think about it. So I talked about the fact that both the individuals need to change and the organizations need to change. So what do I mean by the organizations need to change? So what does the industrial mindset bring to you? Okay. So once you're an industrial mindset and a production mindset, you're essentially optimizing. Okay, which means that you are actually doing incremental change. When you're doing incremental change, you start to get to the average over a period of time. Okay. And quality and excellence are at the edges, not at the average. Okay. So organizations need to move from the average to the edge. Organization needs to stop thinking about the fact that, if they have to differentiate themselves in the marketplace, both from a product and services perspective and from a talent perspective, they need to move from the average to the edge. Okay. And similarly, I think individuals need to also start to move from the average to the edge. Okay. At the same time, what organizations need to do is they need to, I'm using the term enroll. I'm not saying employ. There's a huge difference between being enroll and employ. Enroll is you're telling somebody, you come voluntarily, be part of my journey. Okay. I'm not going to employ you to do something. You are part of my journey. And I wanted to use the term artist because organization needs to start to think of people as artists, not as painters. There's a huge difference between artist and a painter. So what do I mean by that? An artist is somebody who's proud of what he does, what he delivers. Okay. A painter is somebody who copies. Okay. Once you have a sense of being an artist, there's pride in the work, there is freedom. Okay. There's a freedom of expression and you want to do more. Okay. So I think the mindset change for an organization is move from average to the edge, look at enrolling people as artists. Okay. And from the other perspective, organizations also need to understand what are the other drivers, for this attention deficit. Is it just external triggers? We say a mail coming every 5 minutes or and WhatsApp message coming every 2 minutes or whatever, or are they internal triggers? Okay. In my belief, the internal triggers are a lot more powerful than the external triggers. Internal triggers include, we're bored. Okay. So how do you fix boredom? Okay. We are anxious. Okay. How do you fix that? There's always uncertainty, the fear of missing out. So how do you fix that? So organizations need to reinvent themselves on these axes in order to be able to win the talent war. This is probably a kind of a very politically incorrect statement. Okay. And and I said, what is agile? Okay. Today, like I said, agile is two things. One is more, and it's also, we use the term interchangeably for speed. We want something fast, okay, and we say agile, okay. And agile also we measure in software engineering in terms of velocity, right? Again, it's in a way of speed, in the right direction, so to speak. Also, we start to measure, in terms of, production units, that is how many story points, how many epics, etc., etc. So again, we have taken this concept of agile and put a production mindset to it. And I think we need to start to think of it very differently. I think agile is about adjustment. Okay, it's not about speed. So what do I mean by adjustment? So today, whenever we do anything, we are off course right from the day one. Okay, agility is about being able to constantly correct course and bring yourself out, to the final destination point in an optimal manner. It's about adjustment. So, what do I mean by adjustment? Organizations need to be willing to say that I'm not putting a perfect product out. If you look at agile today, agility, when you're talking about speed, there's a chance of you crashing, okay? And we start to put a lot of, devices and, processes and methods, etc., in order not to crash, okay? But we know that we're not going to deliver a perfect product. Organizations need to accept that we will not be delivering a perfect product when we use this, agility as a lever. So organizations need to be able to tell customers, okay, that yes, it's not a perfect product, but I'm going to get there. So that's why, to me, agility is about adjustment. And the measurement should move from speed to adjustment. How far are you off course and how are you going to correct it? I mean, this is probably a bad example. For example, we all know, there was a company which invented glue that did not stick. Okay. And what did it do? It made a post-it note out of it, right? So we call it innovation. I would call it adjustment. Okay, we adjust it. Okay, so I think organizations need to be willing to put products out which are not finished. And when I say not finished, I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but it kind of works. But tell the customers, tell the employees, tell everybody this is what we're looking for, because agility and speed and perfection don't go together. Okay, and I think organizations need to accept that and change the way we measure agility. It's a very important part of the whole equation for both the organization and the individual. The second thing is, in order to be at the edge, I talked of the term craftsman, right? I talked of the term artist, and I'm calling it craftsman. Okay, craftsmanship is very different from a worker. Okay, today we are trying to break down software engineering into kind of smaller chunks which we can do repeatable, etc., etc. I think we need to start to treat it as a craft. Okay, once you start to treat it as a craft, people look at it very differently. Craftsmen get involved in their work. Once they get involved in their work, there's a lack of boredom, there's a lack of there's an expression of freedom, and then work starts to get much better. Okay, second thing is, I think the organizations need to look at it as doing it interesting versus doing it right. Okay, I'm saying obviously doing interesting and right. Let me give an example of this. So for example, you're driving down the road along, whatever 200 mile or 200 kilometer stretch, and it's boring, right? One way you make it interesting is you can say, okay, how many cars with the number plate starting with 2 are coming in this direction. So you start to make your journey interesting. Okay. Similarly, today there is technology that allows you to do it. Okay. For example, let's say a similar analogy is, let's say you're doing a repetitive, boring data processing work. So one of the challenges that the system could throw is, how many transactions today that you're processing with this client ID? Okay. I mean, you start to engage the mind, and start to make it interesting. Okay. This is probably a very trivial example of how to do it. But today, I think there is technology which allows you to integrate yourself itself into the workflow and make these kind of interesting kind of moves that makes your work interesting. So I think organizations need to shift from measuring only right, is it 100% accurate, is it 100% FTR right, is the quality 100%, to how interesting that we have made it. We all have talked about this, flatten the hierarchy, and I think flatten the hierarchy is probably one of the most needed things in this time, because of the fact that today we can do it in a networked kind of an economy, in a networked kind of an organizational structure. I don't see a need for having more than 2-3 layers from the top. Okay, so what does it do? It allows people to be in the spotlight much easier than when you're 10 layers down. Okay, and when people are in the spotlight, they tend to perform much better. So it's very important to flatten the hierarchy, not just from a span of control perspective, but we should look at it as the ability to give people the opportunity to be in the spotlight. Finally, today, at scale, there's an ability for us to treat people differently. See, today, let's say you're shopping at whatever, Amazon or whatever, you get targeted advertisements, etc. for you. Okay, why can't the same thing be done from an employee experience perspective? Why can't I define my own leave policy? Why can't I define my own work hours? Why can't I have my own pay breakdown or whatever? So I think today at scale, you are able to actually treat people differently, and that's another unique proposition which organizations take a look at. I have essentially 2 more things. Okay, I think this is going to be key. We are all moving to what I call as the connection economy. Okay, the connection economy is about how well you're connected to other people and how well you contribute. In order to connect, generosity needs to be one of the core values of an organization. Okay, see, only when you're generous, you're willing to give, and only when you give, you can get. Okay, it's very important for us to understand. And I think generosity will be one of the core values that organizations need to build there. Today we have value statements which talk of many things, right? Accountability, client-centric, etc. I think going forward, generosity needs to be one of the key things and not protection. Today, we're all measured on individual successes. I think organization needs to move from being, individual to a generosity mindset. I think so. The HR systems, the rewards, the recognitions need to move to that. And finally, time. Okay, I think time is probably single biggest differentiator in my opinion. I think flexibility in time is going to be one of the key things. All of us have the same 24 hours. So what do we do is going to be very important. Okay, so I think people should look at time as something which they can actually as a competitive advantage, which means that if others are not being mindful or concentrating, and I can do 30 minutes of concentration, okay, it's a competitive advantage. So from an individual perspective, we should look at it as a competitive advantage to be mindful and actually use time very creatively. From an organization perspective, I think organization needs to actually plan for time for people to recover, to think, energize. Okay, for example, I'm saying, you could say, see, I think we all know that some companies like Google give like 20% of their time for innovation. I'm saying it needs to be built in everything we do. Let's say you have a 1 hour meeting, you probably given a 15 minutes time to re-energize. Okay, so this should be built in as part of the workflow systems of the organization. They should be built in time for you to think. So that's when there's an accountability for you to think. So organizations need to actually treat time very, very differently, and not ask you to book the entire 8 hours and talk and kind of figure out what you're doing every minute of those 8 hours. So I think this is going to be a fundamental differentiator for everybody. And finally, I have only one thing to say. All of this is I think everybody knows, right? So there's nothing really kind of new. So I want to end it on the Zen thing. So it kind of says, right, how do I live a perfect life? It's a very simple thing, right? It says, avoid all evil and perform all good. And the master says, and the student says, even a 3-year-old knows it. Yes, even a 3-year-old knows this, but even a 100-year-old, can do it. So these are things we know, and these are things that we can do. Okay, but this is going to take both the organization to change some of the fundamental tenets and premises, and the individual to also look at it very differently. But I think the change has to be a lot more systemic from the organization perspective. Okay, while the individual can then be made to excel. Okay, to have freedom, to be an artist. Okay, so I think going forward, the industry is going to be different. I think with the talent shortage and the need for us to attract and retain talent needs to be treated as artists. Okay? And that I think is going to be the biggest differentiator for all of us going forward. So that's all I had. I'm open to any questions in case we have time, or in case we don't have time, happy to take it offline. So as I said, some of this is politically incorrect, but it's okay. So thank you.
Thank you so much, BRK. I think you mentioned the faster you go, the slower you get. Super powerful thought for all of us to take away. One quick audience question before we let you. You definitely very aptly spoke about agility being misused or misrepresented nowadays. So are there any other buzzwords similar to agility that you think are misused currently within organizations?
Honestly, I think you can have a dictionary of it. It can start with reimagine and reboot, by the way. So I think I think there's always good intention with starting with some word. At some point in time, it gets morphed, and it starts to become a lowest common denominator, and people tend to use it very, very differently. So I think I spent time on agility because I think it means something else. Okay, and the point I want to make is when the Agile Manifesto, which is probably the early 2000s, came, it had a different kind of an organization. See, you needed everybody almost to be at the same skill level in order to be agile. So you can't have a PhD and a UKG student in one team and make it agile. It really doesn't work. Okay, so I think we have lost the intention of what is agility or what is being agile and kind of morphed it. Okay, and agile is about it's constantly working and tinkering, so to speak, and getting it right. Okay, so I call it adjustment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for that and for sharing your expertise with us, BRK.
Thank you. Appreciate it and have a great day.
You too. Stay tuned for the next exciting session. But before that, a quick word from our partners.
We started with computers. We didn't stop at computers. We didn't stop at storage or cloud. We kept going, working with our customers to enable a kind of technology that can guide an astronaut back to safety and help make a hospital come to you instead of you going to it. So when it comes to your business, we'll stop at nothing.
Workforce productivity is just one key facet under the umbrella of organizational culture, which is becoming a primary concern for leaders as hybrid and distributed working models awaits us on the other side of this pandemic. Effectively creating and reinforcing cultural norms in such a construct will be an imperative going forward. In this coffee chat, we have Siddhant Rastogi, Managing Partner and Global Head for Zinnov, engaging in a conversation with Lisa Leskow, Chief People Officer at Bristlecone, and intercultural coach and author Aarti Kelshikar on Rebooting Culture 2.0. Over to you, Siddhant, for what I'm sure will be an absolutely riveting discussion.
Thank you, Priyanka. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Aarti. Very great to have you on the panel. Both of you are high achievers. And what I'll do is I'll quickly jump into it. And maybe I'll start with Aarti. So Aarti, you have been researching culture and org behavior. You've actually written a book on it, and maybe you're writing another one. I'm just wondering that if the research actually helped make sense of this pandemic and how things have evolved, and what are the few changes or shifts in the way organizations are behaving that you see happening in the future?
Yeah, I'll go with that. Thanks, Siddhant. So great to be here, and I'm looking forward to this chat. Okay, so since we're talking about culture, let me begin with a definition which I personally like, which is, culture is what people do when no one is looking. So as we know, culture is shaped not so much by, the mission statement, top management speeches or manuals, but it's more by the day-to-day interactions and influences within an organization. In that sense, the pandemic has dramatically changed the way an organization works, the way teams work, and the way organizations interact with society, right? We've seen priorities change. Initially, and this may sound a bit simplistic, but to kind of just put it in perspective, initially the short-term priority for organizations was employee safety, perhaps, and ensuring smooth IT systems, right? Mid-term priority was perhaps around business continuity. Now, the longer-term priority is to get emotional energy back in the system and a sense of well-being, right? Something we'll talk about later. So given these priorities and their change, what has emerged is that companies hire on something called digital DNA, okay, have found it relatively easier to adapt. Okay, so what I mean by this is, organizations with the right culture and mindset of agility, innovation, risk-taking, to support digital transformation. So there are a couple of these attributes and these markers. So one important attribute of digital DNA is collaboration, and that's a shift that has taken place. Let me elaborate. According to a Deloitte study in India, 92% of the organizations in their study had improved collaboration during the lockdown. Okay, that's a big number. For example, a leading FMCG company would have, started having cross-functional meetings daily. Earlier, teams came together from a functional perspective, but now they would collaborate with an aim to find a solution and make things happen. So work culture increasingly has become less siloed and more distributed. Yeah, and this is something that you'd probably have a viewpoint on as well. So the crisis saw hierarchy loosening up, and that's not a small deal, especially, given the Indian culture, right, with hierarchy and all of that. So the structure slowly changing from command control to empowering employees at the same time. Of course, it's still in flux, right? And this is a beginning of a trend. Some companies have even tweaked the classical version of management committees, where decisions were taken. So decisions have kind of, been taken more quickly. Going forward, companies will need to move beyond the hierarchical model and the culture of hierarchy. Technology, of course, will help drive this further. Many things have changed. I think collaboration is definitely one big area, and that's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Okay, excellent, Aarti. I'm sure you've put in so many words. I'm tempted to just continue with you. Maybe we'll get to it slightly later. I'd love to get Lisa into the dialogue now. Lisa, you have worked across multiple companies, right? You worked across IBM, the large ones. You worked across product companies, and in each firm, you have managed global teams. You also joined Bristlecone very recently, almost in the thick of the pandemic. And what do you think were the unique challenges that you faced as you came in and in this newer environment?
Yeah, and I think the pandemic was a shock for everyone, right? Having to work differently and to collaborate differently. And for me, actually, I wouldn't say it was so much of a shock because I think I kind of grew up starting at IBM. We were 50% of our workforce was remote. So you learned right away how to collaborate and work with global teams across. And we used collaboration tools, effectively to do that. So when I came to Bristlecone, no, they had already kind of gone through, some of the hardest part of the pandemic and had actually hired me. And I'm actually 100% remote today. So I think people have changed kind of their philosophy and the ways of working and realizing that we can still be connected. We can still have ways to be connected. And I think also coming into the organization, also having that level of comfort. I can also help the teams develop that level of comfort around collaborating remotely and how we can connect better together.
Interesting. Thank you. So Aarti, I think when we were chatting a bit before this coffee chat, what you mentioned is that you're actually working on a new book. And while doing so, you're also interacting with multiple CEOs of different firms. And I was pretty intrigued with that. Do you want to tell us a bit about not just the book, but also, some of the key best practices, some very interesting anecdotes that you may have had from speaking to many of these leaders during this time?
Yeah. Okay, so I am working on a book, the second one, on women leadership and culture. It's been fascinating. I've spoken to leaders, women and men from some of the South Asian and East Asian countries. And given that this book was essentially born during COVID, or the research at least was born, that was an aspect that was talked about. Business leaders shared a few things that they did well or didn't. So I'll share a few examples. One example is that of a tech startup in Thailand. So this was, a team of 2 founders, and so the business was affected during the COVID situation. They had to downsize. The leadership team had to manage employees, keep their morale up, amongst other things, right? Amongst the day-to-day business challenges. They were stressed, but they kept calm. And in meetings with mid-management, they shared what the real situation was, even if they didn't have the answer. So one statement in particular from my conversation with them stood out in my mind, which was, she said, transparency is the key and sensitivity is everything. And this is interesting because it's consistent with the cultural nuances of working in Thailand. So you have, on one level, you have the organization culture, but you also have the dynamics of an overarching work culture. And that really impacts how things work, and in a crisis, right? Because that's when you go to your go-to culture. Yeah. So that was one piece. Interestingly, on the other hand, I spoke with the CEO of an organization in another Asian country, and he said this, okay, and I quote, he said, when COVID happened, we were thinking largely of the impact on our business and not so much about how our people may be affected. Okay. There was a lack of empathy when I look back, and communication centered around business priorities only. This impacted employee morale and productivity. I wish we could have focused more on the health and safety of our people. Okay. So needless to say, of course, this was a very candid, very honest assessment. And it really goes to show how COVID has been a leveler in some ways, in terms of the need for empathy and engagement across cultures and organizations. And it's not just business communication. People have realized that it's equally important to connect with people, right, at a personal level. So we've spoken about two Asian countries. Let's come to India. A senior leader of a large Indian conglomerate conducted at least 60 calls, okay, with his direct reports and their families, okay? So he literally was on these calls with all of them, on one call. Most of them would be talking from their living room, and the kids would be asking him questions. How will this pan out? Or, what do I do about working? Will I get a job? So it was all about connecting, providing support, answering questions. So I think a lot of communication has changed. Things are now done a bit more deliberately, perhaps. Senior leaders often, again, this depends on the overarching culture. In Asia is more about relationships, as you know. So, people do ask questions now, begin with asking, how are you? How can we help? Right? And interestingly, the last nugget that I have in terms of a data point is, Glassdoor had a lot of employee reviews. So apparently there were some 1.4 million employees, when the pandemic started. So they gave their leaders much higher ratings in terms of honest communication and transparency during the first 6 months of the pandemic compared with the previous year, the year before the pandemic. So I thought that was interesting from a global data perspective. So I think, leaders have done a lot around communication, around transparency, around empathy, around the need to connect. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Aarti. Those were very insightful. Then I will continue to think about those. Lisa, I will come to you on, specifically on the tech context, right? How do you bring all of these great things that Aarti mentioned? How is it possible to actually bring it into the technology context in the work environment that you deal with? And can you talk to us about some of the best practices and instances of helping with connecting employees or taking care of employee well-being?
Yes, and I think, as I've talked about, the fact that we have the tools to be able to collaborate and bring everybody together. I think one thing that I found, especially when I joined Bristlecone, is that the beauty of all of us being together was that people were not able to disconnect either. And a lot of people would give me the feedback that, how can I get that kind of work-life balance? And how can I take a vacation, right, when I have no place to go because I need to stay inside? So we really looked at that situation to see, what can we do for our employees? How can we help them find time, right, to kind of disconnect, to find that kind of work-life balance? And the one thing that we implemented at Bristlecone was a concept called My Day Fridays. And what we did is we said, on Friday afternoons, we're not going to have meetings. We're basically, you block off your calendar. If it's your Friday afternoon, no matter what time zone you're in, this is your time. So you can use this for learning. You can use this to, catch up on your emails or to plan for your next week. But this way they didn't need to use the weekend, right, which is time for their family and time to disconnect, to actually to do work. So I think the My Day Fridays has been a great concept. I've gotten feedback from our employees just to say that they've used this time really to plan for themselves and feel like they can be in control, right? And to gain more control out of their life. So I think that was definitely a best practice that we've implemented. Another thing that we did also in the US too was implement, unlimited vacation. So we can't do that in every country, but it did help us to, give people a little bit more flexibility and control. Now, obviously they have to do the planning and work with their manager as far as the time they take, but at least it gives them a little bit more flexibility too, in how they, can manage their work-life balance.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. I'll maybe come back to you for one more. Aarti, we discussed quite a few points, right? And at least one question that I wanted to ask you, and I'll see if we have time for more, is as we look ahead and basis your conversations during the pandemic and the work you've done with the new book, etc., where do you believe the organizations and the management team should focus going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, okay, so I think, putting things in perspective, I think the needs have changed, right? The need in the past was to have a physical office. Now it's probably good internet connectivity in your home office. The need in the past was to have privacy in a cubicle. Now it's about having privacy in your living room. The need in the past was to have work-life balance. Today, mental health has moved, center stage. I think two focus areas, they're probably related, which are, employee engagement, well-being. I think that's a big focus area, and organizations should be and are being cognizant of this. So I think, questions that, so people have, on the well-being aspect, people have questions, right? I mean, right from how can I keep my job? How can I support my family? How can I earn my salary? What does the future hold? So the variables have increased, and organizations have to recognize that the needs have shifted, right? If they want to retain people. And Lisa spoke about, what they're doing, some of the measures, etc. right? I mean, organizations are doing all kinds of things. They're organizing buddies, mentors, offering counselors on call, all about work-life balance and maintaining that. Related to this is the aspect of engagement. So employees, as they resume work, and that's happening in different ways in different industries and different countries, how do they, as they resume work, they should be asked how they should rethink work, right? Because that's a big one now. Globally, as per surveys, 60% of people want to work 3 days a week, right? That seems to be the most preferred model. So how does that work? One needs to figure, how will there be a connect with people who come in on one day and others who work from home or come in on another day? Yeah. What happens to team spirit? Who is responsible for creating or maintaining it, right? In the past, one had team dinners, one had offsites. When is that going to even resume? Yeah. The other aspect is, how are organizations going to value and recognize people who've done good work? In many organizations, the people, the IT people have really held the fort, right?
Yeah.
How have they been appreciated? Have they been appreciated? So I think these are some of the aspects, and I think ways of recognizing, ways of rewarding are now in a virtual world or in a hybrid world. How does that work? The other piece that I wanted to talk about is, women in the pandemic, right? They've borne the brunt of work responsibilities, in some parts of the world more than others. They've also lost more jobs. How is the organization, recognizing this and working around it, right? Because you have to, if you want to keep them, appreciated, valued, happy. So I think this is, new uncharted territory for all of us. So there are no ready available answers. But I think organizations just have to be mindful, have to be cognizant of including people in the conversation and figuring it out, as they go ahead.
Perfect, Aarti. Lisa, I have some very interesting questions from the audience, and I would want your help on a couple of those. The first question, which is actually very relevant, is how do you think about the new joinees who join the system, right? They're still at home. The typical ways of integrating them into the org are no longer valid. What are some of your suggestions around that?
Yeah, and actually we've had to, transition to hire people without really, more sight unseen in many cases, that we're actually interviewing people over video, right? And making decisions. What we found though is it's really important that you build some kind of an orientation program for them. And we've put together this hire, train, deploy model. So we're bringing people on, we're hiring them, but we're actually putting them through an onboarding process and putting together some basic training modules. So we feel that they can, kind of get up to speed. And this is all virtual, right? So we're actually connecting with them, ensuring that they have a mentor or a buddy when they start, because it's just really crucial in that first couple weeks that they're there, as well as the first 3 months. That people feel like they're supported, they're feeling connected, and having opportunities to engage. And then also to make sure that once we actually put them on, and we're a consulting company, so we deploy them onto projects, we want to make sure that they're successful and we're setting them up for success. So I think the more that you can build in, this orientation, onboarding type of process, a more rich program to help support new employees, it's definitely going to receive more positive results for sure.
Very interesting, Lisa. Aarti, I had a question for you from the audience, mainly on the culture side. And it's something that even we've been grappling with. Almost every customer we speak to talks about this. It's great for, maybe at some points in time or every time to be remote. But what about this org culture? Right? Companies have spent so much time and energy invested in different ways to collaborate and create this culture, which typically stems from people being in the same place. You can do multiple things. So how do you think about org culture and sustaining it during these times?
Yeah, so I think, see, that's the challenge, right? And I think in a way, people have, and organizations have found ways to work around it. So, which is why I said that, collaboration, people have found new ways to collaborate and to connect, right? We've improvised, we've, made mistakes and we've learned from them, right? Now, the big challenge is how does it work going forward, right? Because this was okay, this was probably a period in time, there was a crisis, we respond to it. Now, a response does not necessarily mean it's an organization culture, right? It's just a response. So how does it get hardwired? How does it become or evolve into a culture? I think that is a wait and watch, and I think different organizations will do it differently, right? But I think as long as the intention is good, as long as the idea is to connect with people, build trust, appreciate people, and figure out a few ways and means that work for one organization as compared to the other. I think it's a work in progress. Yeah, and people will. I think organizations will figure it out. Yeah.
Great, great, Aarti. So, Lisa, I have just about time to ask you one final question, especially from the audience and a little bit from ourselves as well. One of my colleagues and Nitika was saying in the morning that behind every high productivity number, and we discussed a lot of numbers where the productivities of organizations have increased, there is an overworked employee, right? So we spoke about giving them half a day Friday off, etc. But are there other things that leaders and HR and every manager can do to make life a little more easier for employees?
Yes, and we actually implemented this Let's Talk series that is actually within our organization, which we hold for employees, and it's really about employee engagement and giving them an opportunity to interact. So we do a lot of kind of virtual, kind of engagement, asking them questions, things that they want to know about. But I think it's been really helpful to kind of improve engagement amongst employees, but also get ideas of what can we do better and how can we constantly, improve our engagement. But it also made it a very informal kind of session rather than us, saying, here's the business results and sharing information. It's really more about collaboration. It's really about, we want to hear from you and what can we do to help you be more productive and so we can support you better. And I think this series has actually been very successful, so far this year.
Great. I think we've kind of run out of time, and I just can't thank each of you enough. I've made so many points here. I'll try to quickly summarize them, right? I think the key thing that Aarti spoke about is even while you try to get people on board, look for digital markers, including can they collaborate? Can they be really effective as team players? The second thing, which I think was really important is this word that you use, that is sensitivity, right? So there's one thing about having productivity, but the counter side to that is sensitivity. I think it's important that each of the managers, each of the employees learn to cultivate that. And that comes back to your point around how do we nurture not just intelligence, but also emotional quotient within each of the employees. And finally, I think I really liked what Lisa said, just listen. There's one thing about over communicating, you can keep talking, but there's also about listening. I think that works as well too. So great. I think I've had a very good time with both of you. We had a great discussion. Thank you so much. And back to you, Priyanka.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you so much, Lisa, Aarti, and Siddhant, for sharing with us the importance of transparency, empathy, and listening being at the forefront of successful cultural edits through some fantastic best practices. While we wait for the speakers in our next panel discussion to set up, let's quickly check in with our partners. The ability to hire talented candidates and nurture them into lifelong employees is what has been the crucial factor in success stories of many organizations. Our next session aims to delve deeper into what organizations should be doing to battle the twin problem of talent attraction and retention, especially in the new normal model of talent from anywhere. We look forward to understanding what a leading employer in a post-pandemic world really looks like through this expert panel. First, we have with us Amit Kalra, Head of Global Services Bangalore and Managing Director of Swiss Re. He will be joined by Dr. Urmi Chatterjee, Senior HR Director at Honeywell, and Sudeep, President of People at Walmart Global Technologies. Our fourth and final panelist is Santosh TK, Director of Learning and Development at Dell Technologies. And as the session chair for this panel, we have our very own Nivedita Nanjappa, Project Lead at Zinnov. Over to you, Nivedita.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, and welcome everyone. Glad to have such a distinguished panel for a topic that is definitely a hot one, truly defining the talent war in India Inc. right now. But before we jump right into it, it's apt, I feel, to acknowledge the pandemic that has defined our current circumstances itself. So Santosh, I'd like to start off with you and try and understand how the new normal has impacted the way of working within Dell itself. And were there certain challenges that it presented which were similar to the circumstances unprecedented?
First of all, thank you for having me, Nivedita, and hello, fellow panelists, and thank you, audience, for joining us on this panel discussion. I'd like to answer that question in about three parts, right? One is my own journey in the new normal, as well as my team and the organization at large. In my 17 years at Dell, I've never once worked from home, so this was 0 to 100 for me, right? I still miss the whole ritual of waking up, getting dressed and going to work in this Bangalore traffic. I really miss that. After 18 months, it still feels a little strange to walk 5 steps from the bedroom to my workspace and spend the day here looking at the monitor, right? So that was the new normal for me. My team is responsible for delivering trainings across the globe. So they were anywhere remote for me. Like they were all in different parts of the world. They would go into office only if they had a training to deliver in a face-to-face session. So nothing really changed for them. It was status quo for them. As an organization, we've been very fortunate to be on this connected workplace journey for the last 10 years, right? In 2010, Michael Dell had said that by 2020, which is last year, we'll have 50% of our global workforce work from home. And in 2021, we have 100% of our global workforce working from home. So that's how fast we kind of fast-tracked our connected workplace journey. So we've always been in the hybrid environment for the longest period of time. So from a culture, it's never been a shock for us when we moved to this virtual or completely virtual world. At some point, it seemed like the only stable thing that we had when everything else around us was so unstable, right? But like every journey, there were challenges, right? Some of the challenges that I want to call out is when I look at our people philosophy, we talk about achievement, balance, connection, and diversity, which is ABCD. It's just so easy. Achievement was really great because we did really some crazy numbers last year in the history of Dell. So we did very well in terms of our revenues, etc. It was the balance and the connection that was really going to be a challenge in this remote environment, right? So we did a lot of interventions with our leadership team to ensure that people who are sitting in isolation and working remotely don't feel that way, right? To kind of get them feel a little more connected. We also realized as we onboarded our new team members, our new hires virtually, they're going to take a long time to assimilate into the culture of the organization because they're going to be in some corner of the world which we don't even know. So we leverage our employee resource groups a lot more to kind of bring people with a kind of a shared passion together to get that little bond going in a remote environment. What we also did was we realized a lot of issues that we were facing were with Zoom fatigue. Which is pretty similar to all other organizations on this panel, right? We all felt that the whole blurring of the lines between when does a professional day end and when does a personal evening begin became such a big challenge, right? So wellness was something we focused on a lot in that whole 18 months that we've been on since like the 9th of March. I can never forget that date when we went remote completely globally. But it's a journey. I feel as we put out a few fires, we see some more new fires. So we're learning as we go along. Trying to keep our nose a little ahead and trying to see how we can better this as a culture. That's my long answer to your short question, Anita.
Thank you so much, Santosh. And I think you did cover quite a bit over there. And I'm sure most organizations have had a similar journey as well. But Amit, from you, what I'd like to understand in terms of this new unprecedented challenge that the pandemic put forth, were there certain short versus certain long-term impact? If you'd like to kind of talk a little bit more about how you looked at these challenges.
Thanks, Nivedita. I think, as Santosh said, the journey has been very similar. So for Swiss Re also, we had like a decade-old own the way you work practice, which actually created this seamless shift, right? I think for us, some of the topics that we actually had a refreshed view was, how are we looking at holistic talent journey? So how do you really apply the design thinking and look at the candidate, right? From the time when the person applies, so through the acquisition, to the development stage, through the engagement model that we actually apply as an organization, and how do we deploy digital adoption, right? And that has a implication both on the short term as well as on the long term. So if I take just the example of the acquisition, yes, so as an organization, we grew by 30 to 35% during the pandemic period. And when we talk about just the recruitment processes, they all became digital, omni-channel, and a number of tools enablement were actually embedded in the process, which not only benefited the recruitment team, but also the hiring managers. And the focus was how are we actually enhancing the candidate experience through the entire journey. So there were like, for example, the pre-engagement programs which were established, right? A buddy gets established right when the person gets selected till the time a person joins. So this is just an example more from an acquisition, but there will be a number of examples on the development as well as on the engagement side. And this is something, which I think many of the organizations are also transforming in terms of how are we looking at talent holistically. The other aspect is the cultural integration, inclusiveness focus, and the collaboration model. I think one thing which we all need to understand is during these virtual modes, candidates are actually joining a team. They get an experience with the manager, their team members, but they don't necessarily join an organization. The feel of the organization, the culture, the ethos. How do you bring that to the new employees? And that becomes extremely critical. So the integration is not just from a business, from an operational side, but then also, from a organizational perspectives, how they understand the entire value chain, and the value chain that is now existing in the GCC is cutting across business, ops, tech, which actually gives a lot of opportunities to unlock the potential. And that's an impact that we actually would like to create for our global organization as well as our clients. And that's where, the collaboration becomes key. It's not that we were not collaborating earlier, but we have to really rethink on some of the models. How are we really empowering our people? How are we creating more ownership across all the levels so that people can seamlessly take decision, without really getting into the hierarchical chains and so on. Then the third point, which I would like to highlight is, which I think also requires an industry attention, is how do we bridge the gender gap, right? So last year, when the flexible working models were, we all shifted to that. And of course, the new normal posed that, okay, we all are going towards hybrid or more flexible models. I thought it's an opportunity to bring in, more women talent to join the workforce, especially when it comes to women in leadership. Unfortunately, pandemic is actually leading to women leaving the workforce, right? As they get disproportionate more share of household responsibility. So question is, what measures we take, what practices we bring in to improve gender diversity, with a special focus on women in leadership. So yeah, I mean, there are definitely challenges which have short-term, long-term implications. But my point of view is, how do we really use it to create opportunities for the future? So we have an opportunity to shape up the models, the practices for the GCCs at large.
Thank you so much, Amit. And definitely in terms of what an organization can do in the long run, there's a lot that we can look at. But Sudeep, for you, I have a question which is probably a little more immediate, keeping in mind the kind of market scenario that we're facing today. When we talk about certain retention goals, how is it that you're addressing it within your organization, probably in a more immediate basis? And I would probably also want to understand how you're looking at it specifically from a niche skill perspective, because the market is especially hot for that particular category.
Sure. Thanks for that. And thanks for giving me the more controversial question. But I completely echo, first of all, what Amit spoke about, right? The journey that the organizations have had is very true. And now when you layer on top of that, the tremendous activity across the talent ecosystem, across industries, the tremendous amount of hiring that's going on, which is great news at an aggregate level. But it also, as you've pointed out, means a lot of talent movement, a lot of, the word nowadays is offer shopping, a lot of offer shopping going on, and a lot of stuff like that, right? I think the most important thing is, in response to your question, is to not react, right? I think the important thing right now is to not panic, not react, but actually use this as a bit of a mirror and figure out what's going on behind the symptoms. So yes, there is a lot of frenetic activity going on. There's hiring going on. But people are also, why are they offer shopping? Like why do people have that kind of energy and inclination in the first place? Why are people leaving in certain pockets, right? And the more we dig deeper, the more we realize that there is not a simplistic one-size-fits-all kind of answer. And that's our immediate reaction, right? The immediate reaction is to really figure out what's going on, right? Is there a gender angle to it, like Amit said? Is there a level angle to it? Is there a skills angle to it? Is there an organization angle to it, aligned to specific leaders and so on? Is there an industry angle to it? So one has to go a little bit deeper and figure out and not try and solve the problem through any one single magic wand, because there is none, right? Even if an organization takes a call to say, I'm going to increase all compensation by 50%, right? That's not going to help anyone because you've just changed the bar and that's all, right? So that's not going to help. I think what makes a difference is going a little bit deeper and figuring out. So number one, at a more immediate level, I think what we are doing is really relooking at compensation levels, all kind of fitment, both for new joiners as well as for our associates in a more cohesive manner, right? And making sure that, are we leveling people right? Are we paying people the right way? Are salary ranges aligned to the right job families? Are we keeping in touch with what's happening in the market? So your question on niche skills. But I think at a deeper level, what all our leaders and the HR teams are also partnering to do is really figuring out how are people doing overall, right? What are the push factors that are leading people to think about even having a conversation, right? What is a value proposition for people coming in or for people who want to leave? Why are they leaving us? And the ones who are staying, why are they staying with us, right? So what's our thinking around well-being? What's our thinking around creating the right kind of workplace culture? What's our thinking around work-life balance issues? What's our thinking, what are our trends on, say, career progression? How much investments are we making on learning and training, for example? So I think these are questions that we are asking and going a little bit deeper to avoid a reactionary sort of stance on this, but trying to respond, I would say.
That's brilliantly put. I think to summarize it, do not react, but take your time and then respond to the situation. Brilliantly put. And Urmi, I'd like to bring you in to one of the points that Deep did mention in terms of culture and addressing the cultural assimilation currently in a remote scenario probably is creating certain issues like infant attrition and even in terms of tenured employees when they want to break out of the monotony that they're facing right now. How are you addressing that within your organization? Would love to hear from you.
Sure, absolutely. It is a big change for us because we were not in a hybrid mode earlier, and we kind of changed completely into a work from home model for the last 18 months, hired quite a lot of people in the last 18 months. So started thinking very innovatively about, some of the things that Amit mentioned, connecting people much earlier in the stage, even before they were joining. We started doing a lot of tech webinars through our tech leaders in the organization with the candidates who would be joining, so that they start understanding what the organization, the ethos and the culture of the organization is all about, and what does Honeywell bring to the table in terms of technology, right? So that was the connection point. And of course, we did have a very good virtual onboarding that we planned, including, we take a lot of pride in our lab spaces, and we have wonderful aerospace and automation labs, etc. And we wanted to give them a virtual tour of the campus, because otherwise there's no connectivity to where you have joined, right? It could be any organization that you work for. So those were some of the ones for the new joinees. And of course, a lot of connects before and after their joining with the managers, even with the leaders at the very high level. We really wanted the business leaders to be in connect with the new joinees. For the existing employees, it was slightly different because we couldn't, of course, get them to work other than a very small percentage who were really required. But we did, start thinking of a lot of fun activities, a lot of connects with employees and their families. We started celebrating service anniversaries with families virtually. So the leadership and would join the employee and the family. One of the businesses started something called a Happy Week every quarter, where they do a number of things like a talent show, connect with the family, a leadership talk, an external speaker talk. These would be small snippets, maybe each day of the week, but that just helps the people to come out of the monotony of a work from home.
Thank you so much, Urmi. Some really unique practices there at Honeywell that you have going. I've been getting a few pings from my team here saying that I need to have a look at the time as well. So the next few questions, I would just request if we can go in for a 60 to 90 second kind of a timeline. My apologies. So I definitely try and want to get into the new age policies aspect of things, because when we talk about hybrid, we need to be able to do that. Santosh, I would definitely want you to come in and talk about how some of the new policies might look like for talent development, reskilling and upskilling in general.
Super. I'll do the 90 minutes quick one. So when you activate a work from anywhere kind of model, then your learning organization has to follow suit by doing a learn from anywhere kind of model. So we had a digital platform that was existing with us already, which was not really being used so optimally. But in the last 18 months, we've seen a huge spike in that. We also created a gig workforce within the organization. So if you have a project that you want to kind of just put it out there and somebody has a skill. So get a sense of where we are in terms of what skills are available within the organization before we go out, what we call the opportunity marketplace, etc. The other thing that we did was completely move all our signature offerings, which were in-class programs, to virtual, so that we could continue to have the learning journey for our team members and not really stop it. We also created something called learning in the flow of work, which was more based on, the flavor of the season. If it's goal setting, then we have something like a small 90-minute session on goal setting. So people get a sense of, or there is a need at that point. So we're kind of filling that need. And so the learning happens a lot more better because it's the flavor of the season. It's the moment that we want to capture, right? Longer term, we've created an organization called Talent Architecture, which really is looking at the skills that we'll require in the future. We're trying to see what we have. So looking at scalability within the organization, looking at performance within the organization to see what do we have, what we need to buy, what we need to upscale, etc. That's a slightly more longer term kind of approach. We're a tech company, so we're trying to see as much as we can to leverage technology, right? That's what we want to do.
Hey, thank you so much, Santosh. Thank you there. Sudeep, I'd like to check in with you on the well-being, which has definitely taken a bigger priority in the current times that we have, and also in terms of inclusion and diversity. I do think they are slightly correlated as well. So in terms of Walmart, what are the new things in terms of policies and your approach to both well-being as well as
I think the approach continues to be strong and a focus is high for both of these areas, right? And for any progressive organization, for us as well as others. But, obviously the new ways of working have forced us to rethink our engagement models and so on, right? So for example, even on well-being, one of the powerful things, and I think Santosh referenced this in the start, has been the power of collaboration and the power of networking. So we've started, for example, workplace groups, which are all about supporting and networking and connecting with each other and learning from each other. And that's been tremendously successful, especially when the COVID wave 2 was going on. That was super successful. The second piece is in the whole well-being scenario, which is fairly holistic. I think the one thing that a lot of us are recognizing more and more is that emotional health and mental well-being has come to the fore, right? And doing a lot of programs around it, having specialized counseling services, not the one-size-fits-all, but more specialized services, especially for associates and families who've gone through some really traumatic times. I think that kind of personalized effort has made a lot of difference. And the third piece is on leadership messaging. I've never seen a leadership team be as focused and involved and as vulnerable and transparent as our leadership teams are right now, right? People are okay to talk about what they are going through. People are okay to check in and actually listen and respond and go beyond transactional conversations. I think that makes a huge amount of difference to the overall culture. And similarly on inclusion and diversity, we've continued the same focus on the same programs, but the element of collaboration actually lends, I would say, actually a pretty interesting air. We were very apprehensive at the start of the year, but as we went ahead, right, we saw increased amount of participation compared to pre-pandemic periods on a lot of our programs. Even simple things like when we did a musical evening with queer-themed groups around the Pride Month, right? That had huge engagement. The amount of signups we got for our resource groups was very, very high. And even starting to talk about more serious topics, right? What does inclusion mean when you're working in a virtual workplace? What does harassment mean when you're working in a virtual workplace? People seem to have the impression that if I'm working virtually or remotely, the code of conduct doesn't apply to you anymore. The modalities of harassment don't apply to you anymore. But the reality is inclusion and the flip side of it, which is non-inclusion or harassment, are equal realities even when you're working virtually. So we've had some interesting sessions to talk about this with our associates, and we've got a very positive response. So the focus remains the same. The engagement models really evolve, and we are seeing a lot of positive associate traction on it.
Thank you so much, Sudeep. This is a personal passion of mine as well, inclusion. I could go on for hours on that topip, but
Likewise.
I would definitely want to get Urmi into the discussion to talk a little bit more about engagement in general as well, right? And Sudeep did touch upon how it needs to be more inclusive and for all. Just wanted to get your views in on that as well.
Sure. So one of the biggest things that we did to engage the larger population was do a lot of innovation-related hackathons and contests. You know, it was wonderful to see that even in such tough times, we did come up with a huge number of ideas because people were ready to participate in contests and come up with new ideas, and our innovation teams and our leadership were very supportive of that. And we felt it was a very different way to move from a lot of negative thoughts related to their well-being that was getting on to something very positive that they could create for the organization and the society at large, because most of our solutions are for the society at large and support. So that's the number one engagement that we thought was a very proactively positive one. The second that we did was we actually created a roadmap for persona-based engagement, because we realized that one size fits all doesn't really work today. So what a new joinee would really appreciate as engagement is not something my leaders would appreciate. So we created different personas, which were diversity, new joinees, tech talent, top talent, which were top performers in the organization, as well as first level leadership. These were the different personas we created, and we drew an engagement map for all of them. People started having calendarized engagement initiatives for every business inside. So I feel that those were some of the initiatives we thought would really help people to engage through work and through fun.
That's a brilliant approach, or me being able to create personas and then being able to target it accordingly. I think that's a point that I would take away as well. Amit, definitely want to bring you in on this conversation, specifically in terms of the work from anywhere concept, and also in terms of the compensation that might be associated with it. Is there any new thing that Swiss Re is probably looking at currently, keeping that in mind?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing this. So pre-COVID, when it comes to flexibility, it was always done by exception, right? Majority of people still wanted to come to the office, or they were expected. And now the expectation amongst people, at least in Swiss Re, is, nearly 75% want to work more from home, right? And I think that's where we really need to tweak our policies, practices as well. So we are actually coming up with a refreshed own the way you work practice, something which has helped us over the last decade, but really now repurpose it, given the new normal that is shaping up. So one thing is, flexibility is a key part. I think we all understand, but I think there are so many other components, which need to be looked at from an organizational standpoint. So first is more about how an individual brings himself or herself to the work, right? So it's how you create more personalized, customized way of your personal working models, which are also in line with the business needs and expectation. And here we are talking about it's more about managing by outcomes rather than by task and activities, right? So that requires a change, and that's where the leadership skills also come into the picture, right? So how do you really make the hybrid work effective and successful? It's not like a 1 year or a 2 year thing, but it has to be made sustainable over a longer period. Then the future working patterns, and most of the organizations are going towards sustainability, which means reduced travel. So we have to think about collaboration, innovation in a different manner, right? And really integrate into our practices. A personal resilience, mental well-being has already been talked about, right? It cannot be just run as like a campaign or just one initiative. It has to be embedded in our plans. So all these are, multiple components which we have to look at, work from anywhere with a lot of flexibilities, but also the management styles, right? And that has to be very individual specific, customized way of looking at it as well. When it comes to compensation, Sudeep highlighted very clearly, right? So this is like a temporary spike, but we cannot just keep on increasing the salaries and make the organization attractive. It's not a sustainable model at all, right? And if people are just looking at only the monetary compensation, then it's a too transactional as a relationship between an employee and the organization. And one has to really look at long-term strategic and have a holistic view on the compensation, right, in terms of what is the value proposition of the organization, what are the holistic benefits, right? And now even the flexibility proposition which comes into the picture. So these are multiple dimensions, right? And we are, for example, 155-year-old organization, right? And we have seen multiple such upsides and downsides or different trends which shape up. And all we do is more to make the organization more sustainable, right? So these temporary spikes will come, but let's look at a bigger picture, a holistic picture here.
Thank you so much, Amit. I think that there are a lot of questions that are coming in from the audience as well. And I would probably look at a couple of them in the interest of time. Just to the topic that you were addressing, Amit, right now, and any one of us here can take that. What steps do you think organizations can take to mitigate risks of talent from anywhere? The risk could be many, but if probably one of you all would like to, take it in terms of mitigation, certain steps that you would like to recommend.
Sorry, I can take that, but I'm not sure if I understood the question. What do you mean by talent from anywhere? I didn't really get that.
So basically, working from anywhere, there could be certain risks associated with it. So in terms of mitigating those risks, are there certain steps that you're taking already? If
I think there are two parts to that question, honestly, and I'm sure one of my fellow panelists might have a more coherent answer than I do. But I feel that what Urmi and others have mentioned, which is that if you're constantly keeping a sense check of your engagement model, you are doing whatever methods you have, surveys or anything else to keep a sense check of how people are feeling and doing. I think that makes a huge difference irrespective of where you are, right? And avoid the one size fits all scenario. But the second piece also is, we don't know what we don't know. And I think it's okay to admit that. Most organizations are in a learning phase right now. And we are seeing workforce models, location models change completely. So one can anticipate risks to a certain extent and mitigate them. But beyond that, right, talent from anywhere, for example, there are so many different counterpoints. I've had two different conversations with two different associates this week. One was vociferously arguing for it, saying how it improved flexibility and talent attraction. And one was vociferously arguing against it, saying that I'm in the early stages of my career. I need to be in office. I need to connect. I need to have relationships. I need to learn. So where are we going to finally land, and which risk will we address more? I think it's honestly, nobody can predict that right now. That I'm sure if someone else has a more coherent response, I'm sure they can share that.
I actually have one other question, which I would definitely want to check in on as well. Are we seeing the new normal on compensation for entry skills as well? Is the salary correction across the globe, or is it just in India within your organizations? How will it essentially play out in terms of the cost competitiveness of India centers in general? So that's the question, if anyone from the panel would like to take that one.
Yeah, so I can take that one. So I don't think this is right now an India-specific problem, because we do see this in various parts of the globe. I'm not saying across the globe, but in various parts of the globe, we see a similar challenge. And like some of my other co-panelists said, we do believe that it could be a temporary reaction to the way the market is behaving today. And we don't want to believe that there should be long-term strategies, just long-term strategies to mitigate it. There would be definitely some short-term measures we need to take. And again, that those measures have to be very holistic and just not comp-based measures. But we do see challenges across the globe, and everybody is trying to figure out that, again, like Sudeep was mentioning, what is it behind it? Is it specific skills, specific specs, then we are ready to take action saying, okay, these specific skills are more in demand. Let's go ahead and make some changes or some corrections. But if it is across the board, you see your trend, then you start believing that it could be something more a temporary spike and would take its own course, like every time during any peaks and it would happen. So that's how I would say. Anybody else can also add on to it.
Unfortunately, due to the paucity of time, we'll take the rest of the questions offline, but I would definitely like to thank all of you all for taking time out and answering some of these absolutely pressing questions that we are all in the HR fraternity and in the India GCC ecosystem talking about as well. Thank you once again, and back to you, Priyanka.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists for that engaging session. We definitely cannot argue against the need for flexible working policies and an inclusive workplace culture to combat offer or job shopping that we spoke about. Another quick word from our partners before we move on to the next session.
5G, reinventing the customer experience while redesigning the relationship between telcos and vertical industries for their connectivity needs. With 5G, vertical industries, like media, can request on-demand network usage through a platform that details their needs and completely changes their operations. Development for such platform only takes 6 weeks, and as we collaborate to build your platform, you'll have full access to our 5G lab. Let's leverage the power of 5G to imagine, create, and monetize service and business models of the future. Schedule your live demo today at capgemini.com.
While there is a place for analysis, process, and caution, one of our next speakers argues that those very conventional and yet civilized traits, when left unchallenged, frequently inhibit company growth and talent development. Instead, we can achieve pure and sustainable progress by cultivating our natural instincts, rekindling that childlike sense of curiosity, and uncovering relentless drive to achieve our goals. Here to talk us through how we can do that and the findings that led to his best-selling book, Primitive, it's my pleasure to welcome Marco Greenberg, President and COO of Thunder 11, in conversation with Session Chair Falguni Desai, Digital Strategy Officer at Microsoft. Over to you, Falguni.
Hi, good evening, everybody. We're really excited to be in this session. Marco and I are going to talk about his book, Primitive, which I read over a year ago. So I'm really excited to do this with Marco. I've known him for a long, long time. Marco, why don't we just jump right in? You chose primitive. The title is a loaded word. Sometimes it can be negative. Some people might not understand why you chose that as your title. Can you tell us what it means to you?
Well, Falguni, as you know, it's definitely a provocative word. And as you said, a loaded one, but I mean it in the most positive, pure sense, the most original, creative, natural sense. You know, in the workforce, we've been taught to suppress that childlike wonder. Kids, researchers tell us, ask hundreds of questions when they're 4, 5, 6 years old. When they become teenagers, guess what? It comes down to like 2, 3, or 4. So that innate sense, that intuition, that instinct we've somehow buried. Now, you know, we both live in New York City. And in New York City, there's a custom of jaywalking. We don't wait until the light turns green. We instinctively jump ahead. But a lot of people in the workforce, whether they are entrepreneurs or in corporate settings, again, do what they, quote, should do or must do rather than what they want to do. I'll give you one illustration that I learned from toiling in the cubicles at the world's largest PR firm, Burson Marsteller. I had a colleague named Mike Clays who I interviewed for the book, and we have a lot of research and over 60 interviews and many anecdotes and a little memoir sprinkled in. And Mike referred to himself as a hunter. He said he was bringing in a whale of a client for the other colleagues who are more farmers. He didn't fill out timesheets. His office looked like a tornado hit it. He refused to manage people. He's the kind of character that when we look at an Elon Musk or we look at a Mark Benioff or an Ariana Huffington or an Oprah or a Deepak Chopra or the late Tony from Zappos, and you know, Falguni, sometimes these primitives can, you know, push the envelope a little too far.
Yes.
But when they're evolved, when they tap that primal drive, they truly can become breakout successes, both in their own professional careers and also for their organizations.
So in your book, you've come up with this acronym roaming, and you use it to describe some of the characteristics of primitives. Can you perhaps just walk us through what is roaming? What does that stand for?
Absolutely. I wanted to have an acronym that was tangible, that was both prescriptive and descriptive, that harkened back to tens of thousands of years ago in our primitive brain, which is nimble and quick and doesn't overthink, but also convey this, the modern era in the phone and roaming. So I'll go quickly through the acronym. Deliberately, we're doing this in primitive primal style. We don't even have slides. We're using human voice. R is for relentless. And as you know, Falguni, it doesn't just mean working hard or even, quote, working smart. A lot of people just chase their tail. Instead, for primitives, they don't lose sight of the big target, right? It's their independence. It's making a big impact. Sure, it's getting paid well, but it's also having fun. Dare we say fun in the workplace? And they have it when they're doing it. O is oppositional. So many of us are on conference calls where people are just saying, hey, good point, Sue, or Chris really nailed it. But imagine the courage that it takes to say, you know, I respectfully disagree. And I know over your career, my career, Falguni, we've had the courage to be oppositional and not surround ourselves with yes people, because we know what happens when that occurs in an organization. It usually heads south quickly. A is for agnostic. We can't just be stuck in our silo. We can't just be stuck in our specialty. Think people of the radiologists who might be put out of business by machine learning and AI. So we literally have to roam from field to field and have that curiosity. M, I'm going to get back to in a sec, but it stands for messianic. Talk about a loaded word. You don't have to be religious to love it. It's from the word Messiah. And I had a former boss that said breakout success is really for those who are willing to be messianic, see their work as a divine calling. I is insecure. And I heard another panelist a few minutes ago say, you know, be able to say what you don't know. Unfortunately, the mantra that it's all good has overtaken both the startup scene, the Fortune 500 scene, and everything in between. And I think we need the courage to be able to say, hey, I don't know the answer to that, or I am a little anxious that that client's going to stay with us, rather than the false bravado. So again, primitives come in all shapes, sizes, genders, religions, colors, etc. But they do have that embracing insecurity as a flame to keep us going. N, and I'm down to the last two, so bear with me. N is nuts, which is, yes, you heard right, the good kind of crazy. Being more out there, being sometimes eccentric, being ready to say, hey, like Jobs, the ultimate primitive, it's time that we think different. Others might think we're crazy, but a lot of that craziness leads to incredible positive change. G is for gallant, which is basically caring about the other. It's not all about us, people. It's also about being responsible, being noble, really getting away from just the employee handbook and what the best practices are, and all these kind of things on the other side of the ledger of civilized. They dot the I's, they check the T's. They are very immersed in methodology. They're measured, they're grounded. We need a balance in our organizations and in our own lives. And what the book is arguing at a real fundamental level is that pendulum is swung way too far in the civilized direction. And it's time we again learn or unlearn what we've been taught and really get in touch with those primal instincts.
So you've worked with a lot of people in business. You've worked with CEOs of startups, large companies. I guess, you know, what I'm wondering about, and I want to come back to roaming, but right now I want to ask you, we're living in this work from home setting, virtual setting. Some people are working hybrid, going into the office intermittently. How does somebody use these primitive characteristics? How do you figure out how to be primitive when most of your communication and most of your interactions are happening like this over a Zoom call?
I would argue that it's more important now during a continuing global pandemic where we're having all kinds of existential angst. Some of us are worried how we're going to put food on the table. Others are saying, is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life? I'm not being inspired. So in that sense, it's hyper useful for your own self-motivation, for your own collaboration with colleagues, for your own job satisfaction and your company performance to really tap into that. And I'll pick three quick ways very, very quickly. One is, yes, let's be a little more insecure and not think that our colleagues over Zoom are mind readers. Let's over communicate rather than under communicate. The other is certainly, let's be gallant. Let's ask them, you seem out of sorts, or I got an email from you that was a little uptight. Are you okay? High touch, people. We got to get back to people in a world where machines are more like people and people are more like machines. Let's get back to what's intuitively us as human beings. And finally, again, let's be agnostic. I have, you know, on the civilized side, I have an acronym that I won't bore you with, but it starts with hierarchical. And I have a colleague, Dr. Danielle Ofri at Bellevue, who's the editor of the Bellevue Literary Review. And she writes that hierarchy in a hospital can kill. Think about it. A resident doesn't want to challenge a surgeon. A nurse doesn't want to challenge a surgeon. That can result in further illness, if not death. So this is the time, if there ever was one, to tap not just our EQ, but what I call our PQ, our primal quotient.
Okay, that's really helpful. Let's go back to roaming for a second. When I hear that acronym, there are certain words that I personally relate to very passionately, like being relentless, being oppositional. You know this about me. I can argue a lot,
and we love you for it.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I'm wondering, you know, there, especially in the tech sector, if we think about people who might be listening in on this call, is there a particular story that you can share from your background that might relate more to people who work in the technology sector, relating back to roaming? If you had to pick one of those words in the acronym, what's
Absolutely.
the story?
Well, you know, it's one of those words that is subject to a lot of misunderstanding, but I go with the middle of the roaming and I pick M. Falguni, you know this, but I lost a dear friend on 9/11 who was the CTO and co-founder of Akamai Technologies. Many of our friends in India know the company. There's a strong workforce within India that makes incredible contributions day after day to Akamai Technology in content distributions, et cetera, et cetera. Tragically, first person killed on 9/11. He gets checks on all the boxes. The messianic, though, Danny stepped back and said, you know what? I want to make the worldwide wait. He said that, referring to the internet back in '98, as a thing of the past. And that was his divine purpose. He saw it as more important than anything else. So again, in the technology space, if you want to be a disruptor, you really have to see yourself as on a very special calling to do that. Finally, one current client that really embodies that and kind of marries technology and research and healthcare is Dr. Ali Rezai. He's featured in my book. He is one of the poster children for Messianic. And part of that is his ability to say, I don't just want to cure Parkinson's. I want to solve the unsolvable and go after Alzheimer's and go after addiction. He was featured recently in the front page of the Washington Post for putting a brain implant inside an opioid addict's brain as the last resort to stop addiction. So some people think he's too intense. Some people think he's too demanding. Some people think you can never make him happy. But friends, let's reframe when we're dealing with these certain archetypes and say, you know what? He's just on a special mission. And it's more than being a missionary, and he's certainly not a mercenary, other terms that we hear. He's messianic about what he wants to accomplish for his organization to make the lives of others better.
So you're talking about people who are bold, who are instinctively doing things that are very different from other people, who are not necessarily being bureaucratic in the ways that most companies teach us to be. You know, what can you share with us? Perhaps, you know, pick another letter from your acronym. Is there another story you can share? I'll just give you a little bit of backdrop here. When I read the book, I love it.
Yeah, let me turn the tables and ask you. You've been applying it, Falguni. You're one of my fans. How has it worked for you? I know when you saw it first, you were taken aback at that primitive notion, like, yes. Hey, are you sure you want to call your book that?
I kind of reacted to the title and wasn't quite sure where you were going with it. But then as I read the book, and I read it in 2 days, it was so fast. It was really engaging. You know, I think about this. I've just joined Microsoft. I'm a new employee, only 10 weeks in, and I've done this switch in the middle of the pandemic in a virtual setting. And my instinct, you know, when you change jobs, you walk into a new building, you admire the architecture, you have a new commute to work, you're meeting people in the hallway, you're meeting people next to your cubicle or your office, you're bumping into people, you're grabbing coffee and lunch. Well, when you're working virtually, all that sensory input is gone. And that's something very primal that we want, right? People need that for energy. They need to read people's body language. They need to connect with their colleagues, and I'm missing all of that. So I've made it my own mission to relentlessly connect with my colleagues, even if they don't know me. You know, I make it a point to reach out to 4 or 5 people who I don't directly work with inside the company and introduce myself. It's an awkward thing for some people, but I've now figured out that I enjoy this. I enjoy getting out there and just introducing myself.
And you're being a hunter, right? You're hunting for those very human connections rather than being a passive fisher person or even a farmer, right? The whole office construct is still relatively recent. I'm not an anthropologist, but we're back in our collective caves. And I think also being out there and seeing this spectrum of primitive and civilized. I'm a bit of a mutt. I'm skew primitive, but I'm kind of in between. And finding your quote foil. So when you're getting an organization as big and as impressive as Microsoft, you could see, hey, maybe this person's a little more civilized, but they can help me stay on the rails when I have like a really far out idea. So hopefully that's the big idea, that people can really maximize their own careers and take their organization also to a new and better place.
Yep, I fully agree with that. Hey, Marco, we're getting some questions, so why don't we just start taking them?
Awesome.
Here's a question that's come in. Although bureaucratic processes stifle creativity and discourage risk-taking, It also works for some companies that need structure and fixed processes. So I can totally understand where this person is coming from. I worked in financial services and it's a very structured, processed kind of industry. So the question here is, how can organizations maintain a safe balance between pursuing curiosity and not getting lost?
Absolutely. The key word there is balance. These two traits, the civilized trait and the primitive trait, need not be mutually exclusive, right? In some organizations, people really are able to, again, find the yin yang, find what's complementary. I sat down with Alex Conrad, the tech editor of Forbes. Some of you might read him. And he said, hey, look, Mark Benioff at Salesforce, in your book, he's a total primitive. And literally, he's in my book. But guess what? His co-founder, Parker Harris, he's the one that reads the fine print. He keeps them on the rails. So I think when you look at some of the most successful organizations today, you see these impulses that sometimes seem to be butting heads, but in the end, a better result emanates from those energies coming together.
So you need people on the team who balance each other out.
Absolutely, rather than a bunch of yes people. Look at what happened to companies like Enron, you know, that tanked. Or look at, you know, on the other side of the coin, look at people like Elizabeth Holmes, or look at a former client, Adam at WeWork. Those were primitives that went a little bit too far. So again, there's an evolved way of doing this, and hopefully Roman can provide that kind of structure, even for free spirits and those who march to their own drummers, and primitives certainly do.
Yep. We got another question coming in. I love this question. Transformation of a company culture takes a long time. Wow, that's truer words have not been said. What can organizations do to speed up the process and ensure a smooth transformation?
Mm-hmm. I'd like to be correct and say it's all from below and it's a groundswell, right? That's great if it happens. My own experience has been that it often comes from above. That woman or that man who is often the quote highest paid person in the room needs to be super tolerant of different styles, rather than saying, hey, that person is not our type of person, hint, hint. They can embrace true diversity, certainly racial, ethnic, gender, but also diversity of thought. You and Mooney have talked about this, and that's why, you know, in all my readings of business books, some of them have been good, a lot of them have been kind of old war stories and just cliches. And what I tried to do was like say, hey, there's a different formula than just saying, you're an entrepreneur or you're corporate, or you're a disruptor, you're a maverick, you're a change agent. People sometimes scratch their heads and go, well, how do I execute on that? What does that mean without me getting a pink slip? So 2 great questions from the audience.
I have a reaction to that question, and I'm gonna answer it a little bit differently. I agree with you that it's the person at the top. You know, culture to me is like all of the things that are not in the HR manual, right? It's how does your company make decisions? How does your company reward people for the work they do? Who gets promoted and who doesn't? You know, why does somebody get a better project to work on than somebody else? You know, who gets more airtime? That's what makes up your culture. It's not the stuff in the handbook. And so I think if your culture is too buttoned up, if it's too, you know, process oriented, you're not going to get enough creativity to transform your company. So I think it goes back to the person at the top being more tolerant of diverse voices, of different ideas. If your person at the top is, you know, kind of waiting for forms to be filled out and stage gating everything through a process, maybe your company will be too slow to compete with others. So I think it really comes back
too
to
slow.
diversity.
You're so right. And we know that phrase of analysis paralysis, right? The primitive brain is not slow. The primitive brain is actually very fast, and it's gotten a bad rap over the years. So we're trying to say, hey, you can also trust it in a mature, evolved way. It doesn't mean don't do due diligence. Do it, but like just endless focus groups and endless CYA and endless conference calls. There's a reason why in tech circles, they talk about GSD, get stuff done. I'm being correct, right? I've said some
and trust your
words.
gut.
And trust your gut, but it's also, the problem I have, and now I'll be opposition with you. The problem I have with trust your gut is that it oversimplifies what we're talking about, that it's actually something so prehistoric, wired in us, that we need to flip that switch back on and say, you know, we can do this, and we don't have to engage in what the late behavioral therapist Albert Ellis called mustibation. I must do this. I should do this. Instead, it's really getting back to what we in our hearts and souls want to do. And that's the great thing. And by the way, I'm personal. Do you know I'm going on a trip with my son in 2 days? I'm going to Club Med. I haven't been to a Club Med in 30 years. But one of the reasons I'm doing it is because I still remember growing up in the 1970s in Southern California, that tagline that Club Med is an antidote to civilization. And I think when we're all getting inundated by this all the time, there's no time to think, people. So this is an opportunity to think. By the way, my son is also a javelin thrower. Shout out to India for the gold medal in javelin. Wow. It's an inspiration to all of us, your javelin thrower. Show, that's awesome.
All right, so why don't we close this off with just a few practical tips and examples of how people can tap into their primitive brain. This is the last question I see coming in. Any just quick words of advice here?
Absolutely. If you feel that you've been too cautious in your career or within your job, you're probably right. It's time to take off the blinders. It's time to take a few calculated risks. Go through the acronym of roaming. My sister did that, and she's one of the most civilized people I know. And she picked out too. She goes, you know, maybe I should be more gallant in terms of giving back to others. And, you know, maybe I should be more relentless in not losing sight of that big target that I want in both my professional and personal lives.
Great. Thanks so much, Marco. This has been so much fun to do with you.
I give you a hug over the screen, and post-COVID, I want to see you in person, and more reason for us to be multidimensional rather than just on a flat screen, although this has been great. And thank you to our wonderful organizers, and appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you to Zinnov.
Excellent. Thank you.
That was such a refreshing conversation. And if I may say so, one of my best ones yet. You know, cautious and conventional does not equate to successful, more so in today's times. Thank you so much, Marco and Falguni, for making us think against the tide. Before we conclude today's sessions, another quick word from our partners.
Digitalization is disrupting traditional roles in enterprises across the industries. Traditional roles are getting eliminated or transformed to accommodate new next-generation skills and roles. Also, hiring for digital roles is highly competitive with huge supply-demand gap, time and cost overheads, and scales heavily tilted towards hiring wrong candidate. Reskilling can enable enterprises to provide viable career path for their employees, significantly improve employee satisfaction, as well as reduce their cost of hiring by 50 to 80%. Drop has mapped over 4 million career paths and analyzed the Reskilling Propensity Index, RPI, for each role transformation. HR teams can identify most plausible short-term and long-term career trajectories for individual role. Understand missing skills and certifications required for planned career progression. Identify courses or certification offered by institutions or e-learning platforms to bridge the skill gaps. Drop is an AI-driven reskilling and talent intelligence platform that provides in-depth insights on the talent and location ecosystem to assist in enterprises in their talent initiatives.
That brings us to the end of the talent track and today's events at Zinnov Confluence. To recap some of the key takeaways shared by our wonderful lineup of speakers this evening, I'd like to welcome Priyanka Kumar, Engagement Manager at Zinnov. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thanks. That allow employees to recover and energize with pauses and breaks. We delved into organizational culture for remote workplace, which will mean adapting from command and control structure to more seamless remote collaboration. Companies must look for digital markers, nurture emotional quotient within each one of the employees, and lead with empathy. While over-communication is good, but there is also merit in listening to your employees. The talent equation is evolving as organizations are looking to combat digital fatigue, revenge job shopping, and the whole wave of the Great Resignation. To combat these, organizations must look deeper and relook equity in compensation, career leveling, aspects of wellness, work-life balance, and the value proposition on offer for talent. Well-being has evolved to becoming a boardroom strategy, and emotional well-being has come to fore for employees who have gone through traumatic times. Collaboration has led to rise of employee resource groups to address the innate need for human connection. We heard aspects of newer engagement models that leaders are deploying that underline vulnerability and how persona-based engagement is being leveraged to draw engagement maps. And finally, our last session was about tapping into your primitive brain, shifting civilized company culture to the one with relentless drive, where we had coverage on benefits of cultivating our natural instincts and intuition through the roaming methodology, and rekindling that childlike sense of curiosity and relentless focus on the big prize, which can be the most pure and positive paths to sustainable progress and an engaged and vibrant talent base. So with this, we come to the end of the session, and we'd like to thank our partners for this event. A big thank you to our platinum partners, Broadbridge, Capgemini Engineering, Dell Technologies, Trop, our gold partners, Bristol Cone, NetApp, silver partners, Fiserv, Swiss Re, and Tech Mahindra. With this, we come to the conclusion of today's session, and we look forward to having you for tomorrow's tracks, New World Order through the macro lens and innovation insignia. We have an interesting lineup of sessions tomorrow, so don't miss to tune in. Thank you all, and over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Priyanka, for that comprehensive summary to end what has been an extremely insightful evening for all of us. Thank you also to everyone for joining us today as we explored the elements of an organization's military strategy required to win the talent wars. We look forward to hosting you all tomorrow morning from 9 a.m. onwards for our New World Order track, where we will look at shaping the new normal through a macro lens, along with insights from some extremely successful global leaders. This is your host, Priyanka Oza, signing off. Take care, goodbye, and see you all tomorrow.
"5G, reinventing the customer experience while redesigning the relationship between telcos and vertical industries for their connectivity needs." With 5G, vertical industries, like media, can request on-demand network usage through a platform that details their needs and completely changes their operations. Development for such platform only takes 6 weeks, and as we collaborate to build your platform, you'll have full access to our 5G lab. Let's leverage the power of 5G to imagine, create, and monetize service and business models of the future. Schedule your live demo today at capgemini.com.
We started with computers. We didn't stop at computers. We didn't stop at storage or cloud. We kept going, working with our customers to enable a kind of technology that can guide an astronaut back to safety and help make a hospital come to you instead of you going to it. So when it comes to your business, you know we'll stop at nothing.
Talent landscape is rapidly evolving, with new skills and roles emerging faster than ever before. HR leaders need curated intelligence to build new age roles to support their transforming business. Unfortunately, existing talent intelligence solutions rely on self-reported public data constraint HR leaders, with subjective workforce planning, limited global coverage, absence of emerging skills, and lack of predictive insights. Through a taxonomy-led approach, DROP tracks and validates a comprehensive set of talent ecosystem pillars, such as industries, companies, locations, universities, and professionals. We look at multiple data assets, meaning you can get a realistic view of suitable talent for your business. DROP is an AI-driven reskilling and talent intelligence platform providing a comprehensive and integrated view of the global talent, enabling informed workforce strategy and executable workforce plans.
India.